Citta. The forest monks of the Thai forest tradition have always placed a special emphasis on what they call the one who knows. In doing so, they make a fundamental distinction between two very different aspects of the mind: the unchanging knower and the fluctuating states of mind that are known. Because we fail to understand the difference, we take transient mental states to be real, to be the mind itself. In fact, they're just changing conditions that never remain stable from one moment to the next. The knowing essence of mind, the one who knows, is the only stable reality. Mostly we group all mental functions together and refer to them as mind. But in truth, states of mind exist in conjunction with the knowing of them. When we see that distinction clearly, a realization occurs that mental states like good and evil, happiness and suffering, or praise and blame, are conditions separate from the awareness that knows them. The knower occupies a neutral position between dualities like happiness and suffering. One simply knows them. If we can see this clearly, we can put down the whole lot and let them go. The Pali word citta is often used when referring to the one who knows. The word citta itself is very difficult to translate. When discussing the nature of the citta, language has its limitations. Attempts at translating a word like citta into English always lead to misunderstanding because no comparable English equivalent exists which encompasses all aspects of its true meaning. In fact, the true nature of the citta cannot be conceptually expressed in words or concepts. Concepts such as mind, soul, or spirit all miss the point. All words carry certain preconceived notions that limit an accurate definition. But the citta is without limitations. Because it encompasses everything, the citta has no boundaries by which to delineate it. For this reason, the word citta is best left untranslated. It is far better for people to struggle to understand an unfamiliar term than for them to completely misunderstand that term due to a misleading translation. Misunderstanding disguised as knowledge never leads to the truth. The term citta is usually translated as mind, but this is itself misleading. What we generally refer to as the mind is different from citta. Mind incorporates the mental faculties of feeling, memory, thought, and consciousness. It is usually considered to be that which thinks and remembers. Those mental faculties are inherently unstable. They all constantly arise, remain momentarily, and die away. The citta, on the other hand, does not arise and does not die away. It exists entirely without reference to time and space. The citta is difficult to explain, mainly because it does not represent a material object. Since the citta is not something that can be pointed to or examined directly in any way, from the world's viewpoint, it doesn't exist. One can know the citta, but one can't see, hear, taste, or touch it. It has no resemblance to an object of perception. It's not a sensory thing that the mind can experience. The knowing essence can't be perceived because the knower and the knowing are one and the same. For the citta to perceive itself, it would have to split into two, and it can't do that. In beginning to understand the nature of the citta, we should realize that it has various aspects. On one level, there's the citta of ordinary life. This citta is rather like the movement of the waves on the surface of the ocean, in contrast to the stillness in the depths below. We might call the one that moves on the surface the superficial citta. The superficial citta knows the five senses of sight, sound, smell, taste, and touch. It is the one who makes decisions, the one who makes kamma, in other words, the one who is active. This is what we mean by the citta in ordinary life. This superficial citta has qualities and faculties that are changing all the time. It is never without change. When the citta is associated with the aggregates of body and mind, it is bound up with the world of constant change. The citta changes because it must change. Because the aggregates are part of the world, they are inherently impermanent. So the citta cannot remain fixed in any situation. However, the superficial citta is always grounded in what we call the original citta, or the primordial citta. Unlike the ordinary citta, the original citta is something which is vast and unfathomable. It is like the depth and breadth of the ocean, as opposed to wave-like sensations rippling on the surface. The waves are not separate from the ocean, but they do not really affect the ocean either. At the same time, the waves can be quite turbulent and full of motion. They are never still. The basic condition of waves on the ocean's surface is constant change. The depths, however, always remain as they are, still and immutable. The mental aggregates, or nāma khandhas, feeling, memory, thought, and consciousness, are also bound up with the surface motion. The fundamental ignorance, or avijja, pervades the knowing citta and influences the nature of the mind's perceptions, using the functions of these mental aggregates to perceive objects, such as seeing forms and hearing sounds. When the citta is modified in this way, we call it sense consciousness, being that mental function that acknowledges sensations. The citta is modified in that way because avijja, which has been infused into the citta's knowing, usurps the power of the citta and uses it to its own ends. One of avijja's primary aims is to experience sensations. The reason it craves sensations is to validate its own existence, its self-identity. The only way that the citta with avijja can verify its identity is by relating itself to other things through sense experiences. So, sense consciousness is necessary for the citta, infused with ignorance, to relate to other things, thus reinforcing its own self-existence. Consciousness is needed to experience the duality of subject and object, but it is completely extraneous and unnecessary to the knowing citta. So, from the point of view of the reality of the knowingness that is the true citta, sense consciousness is superfluous, because the true knowing is always present in the citta, and remains so even after all the physical and mental aggregates have disappeared. Because of this, we cannot really say anything definitive about the knowing citta at all. Although its scope is immeasurably large, it remains for us a mystery, an unknown quantity. For this reason, concepts regarding the citta always cause people great uncertainty. But the citta is also the one that is most valuable, the one that really matters in the mental sphere. Its subtlety makes it difficult to fathom. We can say that the citta is the essence in a person. Everything else is peripheral. In this sense, citta is life itself, the essential component in what it means to be alive. Because of that, anything that lacks citta isn't alive. It's just inert material substance, and nothing more. The citta is the active one. It creates the 5 aggregates of body and mind. It creates Vedana, Sanya, Sankhara, and Vijnana. It produces everything, including these aggregates. You mustn't think of the 5 aggregates as being 5 different mental spheres, that the citta enters one after another. It's not like that. The citta creates a moment of Vijnana, which then dies away. Then it creates Vedana, and that dies away. Then it conjures up Sanya, only for that to cease. Then Sankhara, then Vijnana again. It orchestrates the duties of feeling, remembering, thinking, and acknowledging. They all fall under the jurisdiction of the Citta, the whole lot. It coordinates multiple mental tasks. To give an idea of what the Citta's nature is, we see, hear, smell, taste, and touch sense objects. But how do we know those sensations? Where is the knowing located? Suppose we see something, and we know perfectly well that it is such and such an object, and we know its purpose, and so on. There's something in us that knows the implications of that sensory input. But when we search for that which knows, we find it nearly impossible to catch hold of the quality of knowing, independent of what is known. Say we know a sensation. The knowing is not the same as the sensation. Knowing is not a sensory experience. Sensations are objects of awareness, something that is known. But the knowing itself is never an object of awareness. Rather, it is awareness itself. Normally, whatever we experience is perceived through the senses. But we can never experience the Citta in this way because the Citta is actually that which knows all sensations. The Citta is the center. Everything else is peripheral. Basically, it is the knowing essence within us. But you should approach this knowing essence with caution because, although the Citta is the one that knows, it does not always know correctly. That is normally the case when this knowing is contaminated from within by mental defilements such as greed, hatred, and delusion. The Citta still knows, but it knows falsely. What result from that wrong view are unwholesome actions of body, speech, and mind. The physical body and the mental faculties are simply mechanisms. The Citta is the force that controls the direction of their interaction. The Citta exercises the powers of intent and volition. That intention in turn creates karma. Because the body and the mind cannot act independently of the Citta, only the Citta can be held responsible for karma and its consequences. When the defilements usurp the Citta's power, they tend to make body and mind act in ways that promote greed, aversion, and delusion. The real power of the Citta is neutral, but the defilements are biased, so they harness the strength of the Citta for unwholesome purposes. The defilements want this and want that. All the time, they are grasping at or clinging to something, and they push the Citta about to make body and mind strive to attain those things. In the end, the Citta reaps the consequences of those actions, which is why there is so much pain and suffering in the world we live in. When the Citta, under the influence of the defilements, wants to go in a certain direction, it makes the bodily and mental activity do its bidding. Body and mind simply follow, carrying out the dictates of the Citta. Because of that, neither body nor mind is really essential for our existence. The essential thing is the Citta. But to free the Citta of defilements, both body and mind must be carefully observed because they express the activity of the defilements. Although the defilements are located in the Citta, they express themselves through the mechanics of body and mind. Body and mind can be likened to a computer, the body being the hardware and the mind being the software. The person using these tools is the Citta. A computer must exist for the person to use it, just as body and mind are needed for the Citta to function in the world. That person can choose to use a computer with either good intentions or bad intentions. Either way, the computer simply follows the commands of the user. The intentions themselves originate from the person, not the computer. Similarly, the defilements are not found in the body or in the mind. The defilements are located in the Citta. When a person dies, the physical and mental aggregates cease to exist and disappear. But the Citta, the knowing essence, does not die. That means that after the death of a person, the defilements remain, because they are part of the Citta that never dies. the defilements don't disappear, and neither do the results of karma created by them, nor does the tendency for them to arise in the future. Because the defilements and their consequences are still active, a new birth will inevitably take place. Karma and its results are then reactivated, in conjunction with the next body and mind. The citta is the very foundation of samsara. It is the essence of the knowing consciousness that wanders from birth to birth. The nature of that wandering is governed by the effect of karmic consequences. And it is the citta that carries those karmic consequences from one birth to the next. This would seem to imply that the citta is some kind of an entity, like a soul. But it's not like that. Rather, just as the vastness of space cannot be described as an entity, the citta is simply a reality that knows. A vast, knowing essence at the depths of one's being that knows the nature of karma and its appropriate consequences from one birth to the next. The karmic consequences that determine the next birth will then dictate the citta's level in that plane of existence. That's the level at which the citta normally functions, what we might call its default level. If you investigate often, you can locate the level that it appears to revert to inside yourself. We call this the ground of the citta, meaning citta's default level. In the cycle of rebirth, the citta can experience many different levels. Our cittas are now on the human level, but there is quite a lot of variation even on this level, from people who are extremely low and ignoble to people who are very high and have a nobility near to those in the celestial realms. It's quite a broad range. We should investigate to discover our normal level within this range. This position is important to know. When we gain some understanding of our own level, we can better understand where our faults lie and how we can go about correcting them. Due to various circumstances, the level of the citta can change from time to time, but it tends to revert back to its basic level. If people continuously act in wholesome ways, or conversely in unwholesome ways, the level of the citta can re-establish itself accordingly. That is, the ground of the citta can change for the better or the worse. For example, when people engage in uplifting spiritual activities until those become their habitual response, qualities like goodness and compassion can become the citta's default level. If, however, a person who is normally kind and friendly gets into a long-lasting situation that causes a lot of angry thoughts to become the norm, angry reactions can come to define the citta's basic level. We also see the same principle in action with people who have mental issues. When they become stuck in an unstable mental state for a long time, that state becomes the go-to level of their citta. We have a problematic tendency to think that our general state of mind is fixed in place. But that's not so. States of mind change all the time, sometimes good, other times bad, or simply neutral. It depends entirely on the conditions that produce the state. Good or bad conditions that occur very frequently can bias the citta in their direction. To put it in another way, when we develop habits, those habits tend to take hold of our mental outlook. When we become preoccupied with those habits, they can have such a strong influence that they become part of our worldview. Habitual involvement can change our whole mental outlook. The most effective way to shift the ground of the citta in a positive direction is to put the Buddha's teaching into practice. Constant and sustained meditation practice develops good mental habits. Good habits lead to a sharper mental focus and greater degrees of calm and concentration. When the citta is raised to a sufficient level of calm and concentration, the knowing essence within becomes more apparent. In truth, that knowingness is so very refined, compared to our physical form, that its true nature becomes apparent only in a state of meditative calm. Although the citta is bound to the physical body from birth, its presence is so subtle that normally we are unable to detect it. The citta's knowing is actually dispersed throughout the body in such a way that we can't pinpoint its exact location. Only the practice of meditation can identify its presence and separate it from everything else associated with the body. In samadhi meditation, we can experience that separation, seeing the citta as the knower and the body as the known. To achieve that stage, we must first discipline the mind to overcome the resistance formed by accumulated bad mental habits. In other words, we have to train the mind to calm down and stay at home. When the mind is very calm, it is easy to direct it inward. It will soon feel content to remain focused inside and motivated to probe deeply until it understands things more clearly. Whereas, if we try to accomplish that with our ordinary consciousness, the mind will jump about, unable to stay fixed on any one object, because it is still hungry and dissatisfied. The mind is always hungry and searching for something to satisfy its appetites. So, it seeks satisfaction in sensations, which is searching in the wrong direction. It jumps around all over the place like a monkey, but never receives satisfaction. The way to cure that problem is to temporarily halt all sensory experience, clamp it down, and block it off. In meditation, this means keeping the mind focused on only one object. Feelings of dissatisfaction can be undercut by allowing the mind to focus on only a single object, using mindfulness to hold that object in place. This practice anchors the mind and prevents it from drifting. Because the mind can no longer jump about, the restlessness gradually subsides. The restless mind has been compared to a calf that is taken away from its mother and tied to a post with a rope. At first it brays and leaps about, trying to escape. Because the rope prevents that, it eventually gets used to the situation, calms down, and goes to sleep by the post. When you anchor your mental focus in one object for a long time, the mind will calm down and fill with inner peace. Eventually, you'll arrive at a point where the citta is so fully satisfied that it no longer searches for sensations. When that happens, the citta goes still and quiet. When the citta becomes still and quiet because it no longer wants to experience external sensations, you can begin to see its true nature. Seeing that, you realize how rarely the citta is in harmony with itself. Meditation is a process of going inward. Essentially, this process moves from external to internal, from coarse to subtle. It moves from an emphasis on the body to an emphasis on the mind, from a condition of activity to a condition of stillness. In other words, it involves a movement away from the realm of the known and into the realm of the knowing. Once the mind becomes skilled at achieving calm and concentration, it begins questioning its relationship to the known, the objects of its awareness. The body is made up entirely of inert material substances, physical matter that on its own has no awareness. Since physical matter is incapable of knowing itself, what is it that knows the body? Where is that awareness located? Feelings don't know themselves. They are known. What is it that's aware of feelings? Memories, perceptions, and thoughts are all objects of awareness. They are known as they arise and cease, but they themselves have no innate awareness. So, what knows them? If body, feelings, memories, thoughts, and perceptions are all known, there must be an independent knower that encompasses all aspects of body and mind. There is such a knower, of course, but the problem is that ignorance weaves a web of delusion around the knower, distorting its knowing in such a way as to cloud the difference between that which knows and that which is known. In this respect, the phrase, "the one who knows," and the word Citta are used by the Thai forest tradition in a way that other Buddhists might find difficult to comprehend. Sometimes this understanding may seem at odds with what we read in the early Buddhist texts. One of the standard formulas found in the suttas appears to state that a full comprehension of the five aggregates results in the destruction of greed, hatred, and delusion. This statement represents a simplified view of a very complex experience. The implication is that the five aggregates encompass the entire world of human experience, that nothing, including an independent awareness, exists outside the domain of the five aggregates. If nothing exists separately from the five aggregates, then everything that exists must be included within their domain. That statement is actually true, but not in the way people normally think. The truth hinges on what is meant by existence. Change is the essence of existence, and everything in the five aggregates is constantly changing. Therefore, the five aggregates occur within the domain of existence. Without change, there is no existence. On the other hand, changing phenomena are not real, because reality never changes. Thus, the five aggregates do exist, but they are not real. They are not real because reality is not impermanent. And because reality never changes, it is not known through sensation. And because we can't sense reality, it's not associated with the five aggregates. However, reality can be known. We know it by being one with it. We can put it like this. Everything in the world is impermanent. Everything is constantly changing. And change is the very nature of existence. Without change, there is no existence. Everything that is impermanent is unreal. Because it's changing all the time, it never has any time to be real. What we have here is a fundamental lack of reality. The Citta, on the other hand, is the one exception to the rule. Existing separately from the five aggregates, the Citta is comparable to the unfathomable vastness of space. Just as space is the medium without which nothing could come into being, the Citta is the stable conscious continuum without which nothing in the realm of the five aggregates or the six sense bases could come into being. The Citta is the unchanging reality in which everything in the world arises and ceases. Because the Citta does not change, so it does not exist, but it is real. Being awareness itself, it is that all-encompassing presence in which arising and passing are known. In truth, there is nothing actually wrong with the Citta. Within itself, it is naturally undefiled already. It's the defiling influences that infiltrate the Citta which cause it to experience happiness and suffering, gladness and sorrow. But the true nature of the Citta has none of those qualities. Moods like happiness and suffering are not intrinsic to the Citta. They merely deceive the untrained mind, which follows after them until it forgets itself, oblivious to its true nature. Really speaking, the Citta is inherently as still and unperturbed as the ocean. When the wind blows, the surface water ripples. The ripples are due to the shifting winds on the surface, not to the ocean itself. The ocean depths remain unmoving and unaffected. When thoughts and perceptions arise, the surface of the mind ripples. When sense impressions arise, the surface of the mind ripples. The rippling is due to the effect of thoughts and sensations. When the mind pays attention to its surface activity, it loses sight of its true nature. If it doesn't chase after them, it can fully know the fluctuating nature of mental activity and still remain unmoved. Our practice should be focused on seeing that which knows thoughts and sensations as they arise and pass away. We must train the mind to know all aspects of mental activity without getting lost in any of them. By doing that, the natural peacefulness of the citta will stand out clearly and remain unperturbed in the face of happiness, suffering, gladness, or sorrow. If we can experience this distinction with clarity, we can relinquish all aspects of existence and let them go their own natural way. Ultimately, this is the goal of Buddhist practice: